During his presidency, Donald Trump implemented a series of tariffs under the banner of America First, targeting countries like China, the European Union, and others. These tariffs were designed to protect U.S. industries, reduce trade deficits, and bring manufacturing jobs back to the United States. Key measures included: 1. Tariffs on steel and aluminum. Imposed in 2018, these tariffs affected global supply chains, including African exporters. 2. Trade war with China. The U.S.-China trade war disrupted global markets, creating both challenges and opportunities for African economies. 3. Withdrawal from trade agreements. Trump's skepticism of multilateral trade agreements, such as the World Trade Organization, WTO, created uncertainty in global trade norms. Direct impacts on African economies reduced access to U.S. markets. African countries that export goods to the U.S., particularly under initiatives like the African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, could face challenges. Trump's tariffs on certain products, such as steel and aluminum, directly affected African exporters. For example, 1. South Africa, a major steel exporter, faced tariffs on its steel and aluminum exports to the U.S., impacting its manufacturing sector. 2. Other African nations exporting agricultural products or textiles could also face barriers if the U.S. imposes additional tariffs or tightens trade rules. Indirect impacts on Africa. Shifts in global trade patterns. As the U.S. and China imposed tariffs on each other, both nations sought alternative trading partners. This created opportunities for African countries to fill gaps in global supply chains. For example, 1. Chinese companies began investing more in African manufacturing hubs to bypass U.S. tariffs, boosting local economies. 2. African agricultural exporters, such as Ethiopia and Kenya, could benefit from increased demand as the U.S. and China reduced trade in certain sectors. Commodity price volatility. Trump's tariffs contributed to global economic uncertainty, which often leads to fluctuations in commodity prices. Many African economies are heavily reliant on commodity exports, e.g., oil, minerals, and agricultural products. Price volatility could destabilize these economies, making it harder for governments to plan and invest in long-term development. Geopolitical realignment. The U.S.-China trade war forced many countries to choose sides, creating a more polarized global trade environment. African nations, many of which have strong ties to both the U.S. and China, found themselves in a delicate balancing act. Trump's tariffs and trade policies may have pushed some African countries closer to China, which has been actively expanding its influence in Africa through initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI. Opportunities for Africa. While Trump's tariff war posed challenges, it also created opportunities for African economies. 1. Diversification of trade partners. African countries could reduce their reliance on traditional markets by exploring new trade relationships with emerging economies. 2. Industrialization and local production. The disruption of global supply chains encouraged some African nations to invest in local manufacturing and industrialization, reducing dependence on imports. 3. Leveraging AGOA. Despite tariffs, the African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, continued to provide duty-free access to the U.S. market for eligible African countries, offering a lifeline for exporters. Long-term implications. The long-term effects of Trump's tariff war on Africa will depend on how African governments and businesses adapt. Key considerations include: 1. Economic diversification. African nations must diversify their economies to reduce vulnerability to external shocks. 2. Strengthening regional trade. Initiatives like the African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCFTA, could help African countries trade more among themselves, reducing reliance on external markets. 3. Navigating geopolitical tensions. African leaders will need to carefully navigate the growing rivalry between the U.S. and China to maximize benefits and minimize risks. 4. Sustainable development. Trade shifts and tariff policies impact Africa's progress toward the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. 4. Economic disruptions can hinder poverty reduction, industrial growth, and food security. 4. However, increased regional trade and investment in local production could drive long-term sustainable development. Conclusion. Trump's tariff war had a mixed impact on the African continent. While it created challenges for African exporters and increased economic uncertainty, it also opened doors for new trade opportunities and encouraged regional economic integration. As Africa continues to navigate the complexities of global trade, the lessons learned from this period could help shape more resilient and self-sufficient economies in the future.